Aloha, everybody, and welcome to this week's episode of Faith, Family, and Freedom, where Jim Hochberg and I are going to delve more into what's happening with the COVID-19 restrictions that are happening here in Hawaii. And maybe, just maybe in this conversation, you'll learn something new. Welcome to the show, Jim.
Something helpful, yes.
I feel
We
like
don't want to just, make noise and complain. We want to give people marching opportunities. Like, for instance, these are real, cases. These are cases.
Yeah,
That's what we want. We want to make cases.
for those that are tuning in for the first time, you will notice that Jim's not sitting in a fake setting. He's actually
Nope.
in a place where he can pull all of those statutes and look things up. Again, we want to make a couple of clarifications right away out of the gate. First and foremost, Hawaii Family Farm has made absolutely no public positions on vaccinations one way or another. What we're trying to do by doing these podcasts is to provide information to those of you who have issues with it, so we can walk you through any potential legal problems. We're not offering any legal advice. Jim is an attorney. He's licensed to practice here in the state of Hawaii, but he is wants to make it clear that he's not offering legal advice to you. And there are a lot of ways that you can get legal advice and actually pay an attorney, but this is not one of them.
But we do want to help you understand what to talk to your attorney about. That's what this is going to be helpful for. So what we want to talk about today, this is September. There's going to be September 13th in Honolulu, this new vax mandate for certain public accommodations. And then today the governor announced his digital proof of vaccination opportunity. Want to talk about it in relation to religious liberty claims. We did a previous video about if you asked your employer for a religious exemption from the vaccine and you're denied, how to make a claim. So I'm not going to go over all that again, but we're going to talk about that stuff with public accommodations. But it's interesting. Every day I get this poll online from a place called Poll King. And by the time we get up here in Honolulu, they've got almost 50,000 responses already. And today's question was, now that Pfizer has received FDA approval, is it time to mandate the COVID vaccine? And 27.2% said yes, 72.8% said no. And of course, they break it down by age and political affiliation and gender. As you could probably guess, the Democrat respondents had 68.6% yes. The Republican respondents had 17.8% yes, and the independent respondents had 27% yes. So overwhelmingly outside of the Democratic respondents, people don't think vaccines should be mandated. And I don't think they should be mandated either. I don't know if HFF takes a position on that. I don't take a position on whether anybody in particular should voluntarily take the vaccine, but I know it shouldn't be mandated by the government or anybody else. And so what I was hoping we would do is talk a little bit about what the mayor and the governor have done and what state law says about what your rights are as a person with a religious exemption, and how to go about enforcing those rights with these public accommodations that are going to be requiring you to prove you've been vaccinated. Can we do it that way?
Yeah, let's do this real quick. Let's give a very brief, and I mean brief, synopsis of what we've provided before, so that those who have not maybe seen those early videos will know that we're not going to be addressing certain things because we want you to watch the videos that we did before. And every time a new question comes up or a new issue comes up, Jim and I will make every effort to sit down and have a chat like this so that you'll have some information at your fingertips. So on our very first video, which right now has over 3,000 views, which is impressive for our very first video, we talked about what it means to have an exemption. How do you ask for one? What do you do with the forms you may or may not find online or from your friends or whatever? And then in the second video, Jim actually walked you through the process of what happens if your exemption is denied. So we will not be dealing with that today. Now, what we will be talking about is, because of the vaccine mandate, what's beginning to happen, and I think this, I'm getting a lot of email about this, Jim, I'm sure you are too, is this feeling of the us and them, right? You have people on one side that have been vaccinated and people on the other side who have not been vaccinated. You have public accommodations, which are things like movie theaters, restaurants, the airport, stuff like that. And now you have a situation that has arisen where people are set into two categories. So people that have been vaccinated are being treated better. Now that I'm relaying what we're hearing, okay? So this is what people are saying to me, that people that have chosen to get vaccinated are being treated better. And then those that choose not to be vaccinated, and there are many reasons, we've talked about that in earlier videos, many reasons why people may choose not to get vaccinated, are being treated as basically second-class citizens. So what happens now? Now you have a restaurant, say, where you have to show your vaccination card or a COVID test to have entry. So let's drill that down a little bit, Jim. And I know that you've done some research and you've actually found some situations right here in Hawaii that has already set kind of a, I guess, I don't want to say precedent. Is it a precedent, or is it just a lens to which we're looking at the situation today?
Well, let me make something a little bit more clear, because what you said was absolutely correct about the prior videos, but you left out something that's critical to today's discussion. We did the first video because employers were requiring vaccines. So we said, how do you go about requesting a religious exemption? Because employment law requires employers to honor religious exemptions if it's reasonably possible. The second video was if your employer requested exemption was denied, what do you do under the employment law? And that's important, because we're not talking about employers today. We're talking about public accommodations. It's similar enough in the process at the Civil Rights Commission that people can watch that second video, which is the one with the spring-loaded shoe kicking this guy, I guess, out of work is what your graphic meant. But instead of, if you watch that video, I show you how on the website of the Civil Rights Commission to check the employment and possibly the retaliation religion complaint. This one is public accommodation, so it has nothing to do with employment, but it's the same Hawaii Civil Rights Commission website, and you go ahead and pretty much follow the same process. So
now, if somebody's watching from the mainland, do they check under their own local civil rights commissions? Or
yes, they do. And they're usually not called civil rights commissions, but they have similar sounding civil rights, whatever names. In Hawaii, it's called the Civil Rights Commission.
Okay.
And because the federal public accommodation discrimination law says you can't sue in federal court unless you've had the opportunity to do, if your state has a process, which ours does. I'm not really going to talk about the federal process, but if you're on the mainland, you might want to look into 42 USC 2000 E, I think it is, because if your state doesn't have what our state does have, then you could do it that way.
That's good. And the only reason I brought that up, Jim, is because the video is getting so much, our videos are getting so much attention. People are sharing them. So we just want to make sure if one of our brothers and sisters from the mainland are watching this, that, they might be able to at least get the the process down. I mean, maybe a little different. In fact, it probably will be a little different in our neighbor states. But all right, so take
So
us.
what did the mayor do? What did the governor do, right? So the mayor, August 23rd, I believe, did his COVID vaccine mandate for certain public accommodations. Public accommodations are basically any public place that's not a private club that allows the public to come in. So my law office, um, the grocery store, restaurants, taxi cabs, buses, whatever. The mayor isn't ordering everybody to check for vaccines. And the thing is, if you don't have a vaccine, you have to get a negative test within 48 hours before you're going to go eat or go into this place. So it's only restaurants and bars, places of entertainment. It's not grocery stores. It's not drug stores. It's not gas stations. It's not that group of businesses from the very beginning of the first lockdown that were allowed to remain open. It's the restaurants, the theaters, that kind of stuff. So what they basically said is if you are a patron or if you are an employee, a volunteer, intern, or a contractor at one of these, well, let's just say restaurants from now on in this presentation, but we're talking about all those things that are covered under the mayor's order. You have to show proof of vaccination, and you have to show proof with a state recognized identification card that matches you to your vaccine card. Or you can't come in unless you've had, again, there's another two-tiered thing. If you want to be a patron, your negative test can't be more than 48 hours old, which is kind of weird because if you're a contractor, an intern, a volunteer, or an employee of the restaurant, so you're there for way more time on a more regular basis than a patron, your last negative test can be a week old. So if you're there all the time, your test can be old and out of date, but if you just want to eat dinner, you got to have something within 48 hours. And I don't know why, because it doesn't make sense. And then here's the other really stupid thing. If you are a soup kitchen or other charitable, homeless feeding place, you don't even have to worry about it. No vax checking, no test checking. Homeless people don't get COVID, I guess. So this stuff doesn't make sense. It's not scientifically logical, but it's political. So the governor issued an order saying that people who work in hospitals and the hospitals themselves and other medical facilities who help the state with the management of medical resources by postponing or canceling elective surgeries and procedures cannot be sued if yours got canceled and you died.
Oh my
How
God.
about that? How about
Well,
that?
well, I'll tell you what, that's a good way to end. We're going to take a very quick break and we'll be right back. And there's a lot more to get into, so stay tuned. We'll be right back. All right, thanks for hanging in there with us. We've got a lot of good information yet to come, so please, stay tuned because we're going to be drilling down even more into this whole situation with the public accommodations. So, Jim, when we went into the break, you were just building the situation. So why don't you continue what you were saying?
Okay, so we covered what the mayor and the governor have done. And the reason that they rely on for their stuff is the number of positive COVID test results that we're having with this Delta variant. And so I want to talk about that shortly because I really want to get into the religious objection to the vaccine in public accommodations. But we got to understand where the government's coming from because when we do what I'm suggesting later, that's part of it. So you have to understand it. So On July 21st, 2021, the CDC issued a lab alert, which we talked about before, saying that they were going to withdraw the request they made in February of 2020 to the FDA to have an emergency use approval for that rapid test PCR nose swab COVID test, which since February, I don't know what percentage of tests it represents, but it was the first one. And so it at least has been the longest used. And what they said they were going to do is withdraw their request for the emergency use authorization, which is kind of like erasing that it ever existed. They're not stopping the authority to continue using it. They're asking for their request back. I mean, it's weird. But they're telling people that as of January 1st, 2022, you can't use that test anymore.
Now,
And
we want to be clear that the CDC, because they're issuing so many different guidance about different things, and they're just trying to stay up on top of this, they released a clarification for what.
well, wait, don't get there yet. Don't get there yet,
Okay.
because there's a second part.
Okay.
So on July 21st, the CDC in that same lab alert said to the labs, you can't use that RT-PCR test anymore after December 31st. Starting January 1, 2022, you got to use a different one. And you should
And there are many.
And that there are many. Now, we don't know when they started to have many. I don't know. It's not in there. But what they say is find one of the ones that differentiates between influenza and COVID. And the implication to me at the time was that must mean that the current one doesn't differentiate between influenza and COVID, and therefore all the positive tests were a conglomeration of influenza and COVID. And it's sad to drive public policy on that kind of information. So then on August 2nd, on August 2nd, the CDC released a clarification because I guess their lab alert raised a lot of questions. It's what their clarification says. And so what they said in there, and I actually went through it very carefully and I made a little chart that I'm going to use because they changed the words in the clarification that they had used for the same topic in the original lab alert. So the lab alert said withdrawing the request to the FDA for the emergency use. The clarification says retiring. They are going to retire the use of the RT-PCR test, which is a very different thing. Retire doesn't mean withdraw the request for approval, but they withdrew the request for approval. So why are they changing the description of what they're doing in their clarification? Well, I wish I had confidence in their honesty, but frankly, I've lost it over this COVID experience because of what's been going on. So they're changing the language, and they offer the reason for the quote-unquote retirement is the February 2020 RT-PCR test was the original one, and now there are many. They don't say in there when there started to be many, which I wish they would put in. And I kind of wish we had investigative reporters that would ask, because if they started to have many in June of 2021, that means all the data from February 2020 to the end of May 2021, which was driving public policy, was this RT-PCR test.
Now, I would say
if they started having many in December of 2020, that would make a difference. I think they should tell us.
Well, I would assume, and I'm making an assumption, so I don't need to get emails. This is just an assumption, but I would assume that with any kind of scientific research, it's ongoing. So I would believe that the test they were using, the only one in the beginning, there must have been other ones being developed quite quickly, because they had to have known at some point that it wasn't differentiating between, you know, the influenza and all of that. So they might have had scientists working on this from the beginning. That's what I believe. It's just an assumption.
Hey, why the cat and mouse game? Why don't they just say, since April of 2020, we have had hundreds, and they came at this time. I mean, it's data, it's available information. It's cat and mouse.
I will,
So then they say that there were no performance concerns with the RT-PCR test. This is in the clarification. Well, the news has been full of reports of false positives on PCR testing when the amplification cycle of the sample exceeded 30 cycles. Dr. Fauci in July of 2020 was on a video Zoom with a bunch of physicians, and he told them that that was likely to happen. But the FDA last year instructed the labs to cycle 40 times. So there were no performance concerns. That doesn't mean that there weren't false positives. What that means is they don't care. They aren't concerned, right? So the whole point of this little subset of our discussion is just to say, I am not comfortable with the current sharing of information by the government as to why positive test results for COVID are driving public policy instead of things that are easier to understand, like illness, symptoms, hospitalization, and death. Okay?
I would think there's a lot of people that agree with you, which is probably why there's so much angst out in the community right now. But now let's get back to what the mayor and the governor is doing, because that's really, I mean, it's going to go into effect in a couple days. So we've got to handle that.
So from our prior discussion of requesting religious exemptions to the vaccine at work, and hearing the mayor on TV say he's issued, I forget how many thousand approvals just at the county level of requests for religious exemptions, that means there's a lot of people in Hawaii that have religious exemptions officially from their employers for COVID vaccination. I want you to take that, make a copy, go to the restaurant before you make your appointment, your reservation, talk to the manager. Say, the mayor has said I have to have a vaccination to come in here, or I have to spend a bunch of money every 2 days getting tested. But and give them a copy of your written from your employer exemption. I am exempt because of my religion. And you, as a restaurant, are a public accommodation, which Chapter 489 of the Hawaii Revised Statutes prohibits public accommodations from discriminating in the making available their services and entry on the basis of race, religion, national origin, sex, sexual orientation, and gender identity and expression. And so you tell the manager, I don't have to get a vaccine, and you shouldn't make me have a 48-hour-old negative test if everybody that's going to be serving me only has to have a 7-day-old test. So if you don't give me the 7-day-old test to get in here, I have the right to file a religious claim against you. And by the way, that statute has damages to me from you, but the state can also penalize you with a fine of up to $10,000 per occurrence.
Now,
so let's work out an agreement that based on my religious exemption at work, I get to have the same rights as the people that work here that are serving me, because I shouldn't have to do anything more based on my religion.
okay, and I'm going to throw this out there, and I'm probably going to get some texts and emails about this, but we are not by any, well, I believe when I say this, and I believe Jim is going to agree with me, but he can disagree with me if he doesn't. We are not advocating that you get in the face of a manager at a restaurant and berate them.
Never.
And
ever, never, never.
With anything but respect. You don't need to yell at them. You don't need to make a scene. Stop whipping out your cell phones and recording all this stuff and posting it on Facebook, because you're really not helping the situation.
So let me respond to that by saying, I'm assuming you want the best result from the conversation. Not you, but whoever's having the conversation. So you're going to be nice, you're going to be polite, you're going to be respectful, because what you want from this restaurant is the ability every 7 days, not every 2 days, to have a test if you don't want the vax,
Well, and
right?
yeah, and the other thing too, though, is most of the time, Jim, and you know this to be true, they're not going to be dealing with the manager right away. They're going to be dealing with the poor, cashier at the front, or
No, no, no.
the
But
host or
what
hostess.
I said, Eva, was in advance of making your reservation, go to the restaurant and talk to the manager so that when you make your reservation, he knows that you only need a 7-day-old negative test.
No,
And if you go to all your favorite restaurants, you only have to get tested 4 times a month.
well, I hear you, but what I'm saying is that we have to understand that you're not going to get the manager. Even if you call ahead of time, you're not going to get the manager right away. You're going to get the front desk person. You're going to get the cashier that happened to answer the phone.
And
You
you're going to ask for the manager, and
and
you're going to
you're going to
go
do it,
to a meeting with the manager.
and you're going to
Right,
be
right.
respectful about it. And if the cashier
Absolutely.
tells you the manager is not available, you know what? They may not be available.
It's a hard place to work. They probably aren't, but that's why you do it in advance so that if you happen to like, I don't know, some particular restaurant, uh, you make it work by just do it local style. Respect. But you're
and
right. I was not suggesting anything else.
no, and I know, and I figured you weren't, but unfortunately, we've got a lot of people that are angry. And again, I'm not trying to say that I don't understand why people are frustrated. I get it. I get it. People are stressed and they're angry. And so I get it that you're mad. But what's happening is there's a lot of people who are just doing their job. They're just showing up to work to do their job, and they're the ones getting accosted by people who are angry. And we just have to remember, right, that there are some
Yeah.
innocent people that are just trying to make a living. So, all right, so we have to take another quick break, and then we will be right back, and then we're really going to dive in. So we've
So
been giving you the
before you go, get a paper and pencil because this is where you start taking notes when we come back.
all right, get your pen and paper, and we'll be right back. All right, welcome back. And hopefully you're sitting in front of the computer right now and you've got your pen and your paper, you got your notepad, you've got your Rocket book, whatever you use to take notes, you're ready. And Jim, they're ready. So get in there.
Okay, so these are some points I want you to write down because it supports your position with respect to why in public accommodations, restaurants, theaters, bars, those kind of places that are requiring the vax under the mayor's order, you are not supposed to be discriminated against based on your religion. So let's start with the emergency order statute that the governor has been running the state under since March 5th of 2020 when he issued his first proclamation. Write down Hawaii Revised Statutes, Chapter 127, capital A. That is the chapter that governs emergency proclamations. And section 1 of that, so that would be 127 capital A-1, is the general statement of why we have this law. And subparagraph C, like cat. So that's 127A-1 parentheses C parentheses. It itself prohibits actions that are inconsistent with the Constitution and the laws of the United States. So the First Amendment to the United States Constitution guarantees our religious liberty. The 14th Amendment applies it to the state. So the state of Hawaii, under Chapter 127A, has to honor the First Amendment. The public accommodation statute is Chapter 489. 489. I feel like I'm reading bingo balls. And the purpose, and the Hawaii legislature thinks very highly of itself. So when it makes a law, it always puts the purpose stuff in that just sounds so wonderfully fabulous and fantastic. But in this instance, when we read it, it's like, oh yeah, that's great for us. So here's what it says. The purpose and how to construe the statute, 489-1A. The purpose of this chapter is to protect the interests, rights, and privileges of all persons within the state with regard to access and use of public accommodations by prohibiting unfair discrimination. So right there you realize the legislature created Chapter 489 to protect us from unfair discrimination in public accommodations. So you can see that the discussion is going to be, is it unfair or is it fair to discriminate about the vaccine and the 2 days versus the 7 days, right? But that's okay. The discussion will be had when you file your complaint with the Civil Rights Commission if they didn't give you the longer testing period. B, and this is always interesting the way the legislature does this. This chapter shall be liberally construed. That means stretch it as far as you can to protect rights against discrimination to further the purposes stated in subsection A. So we don't want discrimination that's unfair, and we want to construe unfair narrowly so that we broadly and liberally protect people from discrimination. And then section -2 has a bunch of definitions, including what is a public accommodation. And the definition of a public accommodation is very open-ended. It's a page long, and it lists basically every kind of place you ever would spend money. It excludes, by implication, private clubs, and it used to exclude nonprofits. But when we got into the same-sex marriage discussion in 2013, it became clear that the Civil Rights Commission, which enforces this chapter, will require a church to behave like a private club if they don't want to be considered by the Civil Rights Commission under the same-sex marriage scenario as subject to the discrimination restrictions. So what are the discriminatory practices that are actually prohibited by this statute? Write down section 489-3. Unfair discriminatory practices that deny or attempt to deny a person the full and equal enjoyment of the goods, services, facilities, privileges, advantages, and accommodations of a place of public accommodation on the basis of race, sex, including gender identity or expression, sexual orientation, color, religion, ancestry, or disability, including the use of a service animal, are prohibited. So, you can't be discriminated on the basis of your religion in a public accommodation unfairly, which should be very narrowly construed, which is why I think getting the longer testing regimen is completely acceptably fair. There are other discriminatory practices. It is a discriminatory practice, this is 489-5, for two or more persons to conspire to retaliate or discriminate against a person because the person has opposed an unfair discriminatory practice. So, if you have a friend that works in the restaurant that you want to go to, your friend can support your discussion with the manager, and the manager cannot treat your friend any differently afterwards than before. Or it's a discriminatory practice for two or more persons to conspire to aid, abet, incite, or coerce a person to engage in a discriminatory practice. Sounds like the mayor and the governor to me. They are coercing restaurants to do this because they ordered it.
Now, I want to just make this clear. I watched the COVID task force, the Senate task force hearing last week, Friday, and I'll see if I can link that hearing below so that you can watch it. I will say that the state attorney general was asked specifically by the legislatures if she felt like that there would be cases for people once these mandates came down, and she said, and I can't quote her verbatim, but basically she said that she is very confident that they will continue to be able to skirt all of these legal challenges. And she admitted there were many that were coming down, but she's very, very secure that any and all legal challenges that are brought against the state because of these mandated vaccinations will not be a problem. Now that was
okay, and she's probably correct, because the state of Hawaii takes all of my tax money and can pay it all to her and her office and the judges to defend the state. But what we're talking about today is telling restaurants, hey, I don't want to make a claim against you with the Civil Rights Commission because you're going to have to spend your own money defending your restaurant. You don't get to use my tax money that the AG's defending the state with. You got to use your money that you don't get from me if I can't eat in your restaurant. So hopefully the result of this discussion, if we have people that work in restaurants, people that own restaurants, people that manage restaurants, they'll also hear this and realize, you know what? I don't want to be subject to this claim of religious discrimination and have to deal with any of that crap. So I'm going to be willing that my restaurant won't discriminate and will give people with religious objections to the vaccine exactly what I would give contractors, employees, or other people that are here all day long, all night long, instead of just 2 hours, this whole longer testing regimen.
Well, could a restaurant owner refuse and just not even ask for vaccinations or COVID tests? Could they just ignore this?
So this is America. They can do whatever they want. If they don't follow the requirements of the mayor's order, which does include registration with the city on a website that has a questionnaire that asks what the public accommodation is, where it is, how many employees it has, what days it's open, how many hours, and not just the number of hours, but from X o'clock to Y o'clock. And then they have to swear to comply with the requirements, and they have to voluntarily open their books to audit by the city. So if a restaurant does not follow through and log in, everybody knows where most of the restaurants are because they aren't hidden. It's not like the speakeasies during Prohibition. And if a bunch of city enforcement people want to start with the restaurants that haven't logged in, they'll start there. It'll be very easy to find them.
Okay. And the only reason I ask that is because I know that there are going to be some people that there might even be a restaurant owner that goes, look, I'm not going to be, I mean, you saw what happened in Florida.
If you still support President Biden, you can't come in here.
Yeah. So I mean,
what I'm focusing on and what I'm hoping we're adequately communicating is both for patrons and for owners, managers of public accommodations, you can actually come together, realize that you don't need to and you're not supposed to discriminate on the basis of religion in making your public accommodation available. So you can allow religious objectors to have the least restrictive participation, which is what your workers get. I mean, it makes no sense to me. If I worked at the restaurant, if I was the maitre d', and I talked to every single person that came in every single day during every single one of my shifts, and I only had to be tested every week, why is that better than the patron that has to be tested every 48 hours? It's not better, actually, and it doesn't make sense. And it creates religious discrimination, which the Civil Rights Commission has a process. It doesn't cost you anything to go onto the Hawaii Civil Rights Commission website, go to the Make a Claim page, start typing into the form, and submit it online. You don't need a lawyer. You'll get contacted by the Civil Rights Commission. They will investigate, send your complaint to the restaurant or the public accommodation. That company's going to have to respond, because if they ignore it, they lose. And so hopefully, to avoid that situation with respect to protection from religious discrimination, this video will help bring the community together and solve the problem that's otherwise going to be really bad.
So now, are there a couple other points that you want to make in regards to Hawaii revised statutes 489? Because you kind of
Yeah.
got defined.
So it is the Civil Rights Commission that accepts the complaint, and you have to go through the Civil Rights Commission. You can't sue in court, but if you sued in court, you need a lawyer, and that's going to cost you a bunch of money. But these claims that you can sue in court after the Civil Rights Commission process includes recovering your attorney's fees against the public accommodation if you win. Now, do I think all of these claims are going to win? Let me say to everybody, in 2020, I was local counsel with Harmeet Dillon's Center for American Liberties organization in California. We sued in federal court here over the COVID quarantine on the airplane exit, and we sued in state court over the 60-day limit that should have ended in May, but it still never ended. Both of those cases got judges that were not interested in harnessing in any manner COVID governor or mayor exercise of power, and were not interested in protecting the people from the government exercise of that power. And so it's a year later, so maybe something changed. But if you're going to make the claim, you've got to realize that you might not have a sympathetic Civil Rights Commission, and you may not have a sympathetic judge. But on appeal, if you actually go into litigation at the Ninth Circuit, it's not as crazy as it used to be called the Ninth Circus. It's pretty balanced now of conservative and liberal judges. But I think the mood, based on this, what was it? 72.8% of the people in that unscientific poll did not think vaccination should be mandated. I think the mood's changed since last year, but I don't know. But I think people should realize they have the right to make the claim.
All right.
And
Well,
they should exercise that right.
okay. Well, we've just ended our third section, and we need to take another quick break. So stay tuned. Jim's going to give you the last remaining points that you need to be aware of before we end today's podcast. So we will be right back. All right, welcome back. We are now at the last round, and I know that there are some major points Jim wants to make. So Jim, take us home.
Okay, so we talked about the state law. I just want to real quick tell you that the federal law is 42 United States Code section 2000 lowercase a. So we talked about the state law. I just want to quickly share the federal law. Federal law basically also prohibits discrimination in public accommodations. And that is the same definition of public accommodations. It has a different administrative process than what I shared in the prior video about employment discrimination, religious discrimination. But basically, what you need to just know is you have the right not to be discriminated against in public accommodations. And interestingly enough, where that came from is the Heart of Atlanta Motel in Atlanta, Georgia, in the 1960s. Because in the 1960s, there were black hotels and there were white hotels. And somebody sued a white hotel for not allowing a black person to stay overnight in the white hotel. And the question was, how is it that you can sue in federal court over a hotel that's like not engaged in more than one state? You know, they're buildings. And the answer was because the plaintiff and many other people need to stay in hotels when they're traveling through the states across the country. The federal judiciary has the power to resolve the case. And that's a great legacy. It's a great legacy that we have the opportunity as people who may object to getting vaccinated with the COVID vaccines on the basis of religious objections, which are individualized. It's not what the Pope says. It's not what Bud Stonebreaker says, or what, I don't know, whoever your favorite pastor is. It's not what D. James Kennedy says or Franklin Graham. It's your own sincerely held religious belief. Now, your sincerely held religious belief can be the same as one of those other people. There's nothing wrong with that. But you don't have to have any authority outside of yourself for that claim under the law. And I know employers are asking all kinds of weird background questions on why you wanted the religious exemption and stuff. And I think it's mostly because they were seeing the same piece of paper from a lot of employees because they were getting it from the same source.
Yeah, and I'll tell you what, I got a lot of calls about that too, from people and it's true, if you just, again, we talked about this in the first video, if you're just going to pull an exemption off of the internet or get one from a friend, that may not even really be your deeply held religious convictions. I remember there was an old saying they had, a pastor used to say that if you were convicted for being a follower of Christ, would they be able to prove that in a court of law based on your life and your actions?
Correct. I like that.
And I will tell you that when you're claiming a religious belief, I don't need to go to Bishop Larry and say to him, here's my religious beliefs. Can I get your permission?
Well,
Well,
I wanna tie things together because at the beginning I said, if you went to your employer and got a religious exemption letter, take it with you and use it. Well, if you went to the employer and they said no, you still should go to the public accommodation manager and just tell them, I personally have a religious objection to the vaccine. And if you never asked an employer because you didn't need to, your employer didn't require that you get the vax, you should go to the public accommodation if you have a religious objection to the vaccine.
okay.
And you should say, I do, and I don't want to have to do this. Give me the
All
longer
right.
testing.
Okay. And we're going to throw it out there because this is what's going to happen. Many employers, as you know, went ballistic when they got all these exemption forms. What does this mean? And asking all these questions. So please do not expect that the restaurant owners are suddenly going to be like, oh, okay, this sounds good. That people don't understand this, which is why we're doing these videos.
And
So
maybe bring a link to this video to the manager and let him watch it.
so send it out. I mean, we're trying to provide a service, and again, we have to say it over and over again, we're not telling anybody to treat anybody with disrespect, because I don't want any manager or public leader to call me and say, are you encouraging this kind of stuff? And what we're encouraging you to do is just be aware of what the law says, which is why Jim is doing this. Jim is an attorney.
I'm encouraging people to have their rights. They're still Americans, even in the middle of COVID, and you need to exercise your right. If it's your right, you should exercise it.
Now we're going to jump. We only have maybe about 5 or 6 minutes left. But Jim, I want you to talk about the Hobbs versus Jake case that happened with the Hawaii Civil Rights Commission back in what was this? Was it 80? When was it? 1998? Because I think you had some thoughts about the public accommodations and the Civil Rights Commission based on this.
Okay, so that's an interesting case. It's weird, and it shows you how the Civil Rights Commission historically has been kind of aggressive against people they think unfairly discriminate. So that case was about a landlord that had a cottage that was like 100 and, I don't know, 30 square feet in the backyard that they wanted to rent out. So they advertised that they had this place. And a family of 4 came to rent it, and they said, it's too small for a family of 4. We can't rent it to you. So the family of 4 filed a housing discrimination on the basis of family structure. 4 people with kids, you can't discriminate in housing on that basis. And it's the same Civil Rights Commission. And the Civil Rights Commission looked at it and said, yeah, they discriminated against you on the basis of your family. And so the Civil Rights Commission became the plaintiff on behalf of Hobbs, and And the landowners' attorneys pointed out that the city and county of Honolulu building requirements do not permit more than, I think it was 2 people to live in that much space. There are minimum square footages for the number of people that a building permit is granted for. Civil Rights Commission didn't care. They found against them and punished them. So the landlord sued, which is how the process works. You go through the administrative thing with the Civil Rights Commission, and whoever is unsatisfied with the ruling can sue. And the state Supreme Court, Hawaii Supreme Court, came out with the ruling that, hey, you can't punish somebody for discriminating where the law won't let them not discriminate. And that's kind of interesting because it sounds like, oh, well, that should apply to the COVID thing. And the difference is, and what people really have to understand is, there's no religious exemption in the building department square footage requirements. So it's a completely different kind of case. The square footage requirement trumped the non-discrimination policy at the Civil Rights Commission because it made sense. In this setting, public accommodations are not permitted by federal or state law to discriminate on the basis of religion because of the First Amendment. And you have a religious liberty interest in not being discriminated against. So it's a different kind of a analysis than the Hobbs versus Jake case. But it's interesting that, and it's good to talk about how when the Civil Rights Commission wants to, they can really chase people down. And hopefully they will feel that way about the religious discrimination, about the COVID vaccine requirements being so unfair that you have to get a vaccine 2 days before every time you want to go eat somewhere, but you can work in the restaurant and have a whole week on one test.
I had somebody tell me that when they go to a restaurant now, that they'll go ahead, this is someone who is vaccinated, but they said when they get there and show their vaccination card, they're also going to ask to see the vaccination card of every employee that works there.
Well, let me tell you, yesterday I had a checkup with my personal physician. So I went to the hospital, and when I got to the door, they took my temperature and I had to fill out a thing, and they asked me if I was vaccinated. And I said, oh, I don't talk about that. They said, okay. So I went into the hospital and I went to the clinic where I was going. And the first guy at the check-in said, have you been vaccinated? And I said, oh, I don't talk about that. And he said, okay. And gave me my waiting room number. And I went to the waiting room. They called me to do my insurance little sit down with the lady at the computer. She asked me if I was vaccinated. And I said, well, you know, this really bothers me because I'm a lawyer. And I would never ask if you're vaccinated against Hep C. I would never ask if you have HIV. And so I just don't like this public discussion about this vaccine thing. Just don't talk about it. She said, okay. And I saw my doctor and nobody cared.
Okay. Well, unfortunately, we have run out of time again. So I want to make a couple of things known for people. I'm going to put Jim's information on the bottom of the screen, but Jim does not want to get a million phone calls from people who are trying to get legal advice from him. Jim will not do that over the phone.
Well, I can't.
So, you know, let's make that clear in the get-go.
And the intent of this is for the viewers to have a very nice discussion, bring a link to the video for the manager to watch, try to overcome the fracturing that's going to happen when people can't go to the restaurants, because the restaurant owners can choose not to subject themselves to religious discrimination claims that could result in a maximum $10,000 fine per occurrence.
Well, what we do want, though, is that if you do the steps that Jim has recommended today, and you do it in the great spirit of aloha, and you do it in a great way, by all means, send an email to me at Hawaii Family Forum. So that email is info@hawaiifamilyforum.org, and just tell me your story. tell me what happened. Because I think that Jim and I, maybe in the future, we'll gather all these stories and we'll do another one and just kind of talk about, what you're experiencing out there. But again, please don't call me and ask me for legal advice. I'm not an attorney, and all I will do is point you to an attorney if you think you need legal advice. But there's going to be a lot of information and a lot of things happening. So definitely tell me your stories, though. The other thing Jim and I will do is I'm gonna next week is a crazy week, but next week is Constitution Day, and Jim is gonna put together a really great interview that we'll put out for you on Constitution Day, and that'll be great for next week. And then what we'll do when we recap the following week, I'm gonna take a much needed vacation. And then when I come back from that vacation, I think what I'll do is schedule a time to kind of just go over all of your comments with Jim. So we'll spend a good half an hour just, we'll talk about your emails and your comments and all of that, because they are starting to come in, a lot of them. And so we can't do like we did before, where we read one or two of them because there are so many. So we'll try and dedicate a time to do that, to answer some of your questions and read some of your comments. So stay tuned. We appreciate that you give us your time. We appreciate that you like this video, because that helps YouTube with their analytics. We want you to share this video. We want you to subscribe to the Hawaii Family Forum YouTube channel, so that anytime we put up, actually you got to hit the notification button, so whenever we upload a new video, you'll immediately know about it. So stay tuned for that. And Jim, as always, I appreciate you taking the time to share your mana'o with people in regards to these very trying times. And for those of you that are taking time out of your busy day to listen, we appreciate you very much. And we appreciate your kind heart, your generous spirit, and your fighting spirit, because this is America. So for Faith, Family, and Freedom, I'm Eva Andrade with co-host Jim Hochberg. We'll see you next time. Mahalo.
Aloha.